Talk and Rock Radio, where friends meet at the intersection of life, inspiration, and music. Here's your host, Rick Kern.
Welcome, everyone, to Talk and Rock Radio. If you're a fan of Buffalo Springfield, Poco, and Loggins and Messina, then you're going to enjoy today's episode. From Franklin, Tennessee, my guest today is the legendary Jim Messina. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing good. Doing real good, actually. I got my morning Joe, and I'm here.
Very, very cool. You know, first of all, I want to, before we get into this, thank you for coming on my show today. I know you've been hitting it very hard lately with lots of tours and coming back home a little bit and going to graduations and doing all kinds of stuff. So I just want to thank you for making the time. It's taken us a couple months to finally get this thing wrapped up and ready to go. So, I really appreciate it.
You bet. My pleasure.
I want to start first by jumping back to your early childhood. I want to take this thing back to when you're 5 years old. I think that's about the time you learned how to play guitar. Is that right? When you first started playing guitar?
Yeah, my dad was my mentor, you might say. I loved to watch him play when I was a little guy, and one day he just started putting my fingers, where they needed to be to play certain chords, and that was the root of it all. And here I am at 76, still doing the same thing.
There you go, man. Well, related to that, what pivotal point can you say in your life was the defining moment that you decided that music was going to be your life business?
Probably when I was about 13, as I was going into high school. I was pretty young, graduated at 17, and my first year of high school, the summer before, my parents moved from Manhattan Beach, which I was getting ready to go into high school there. And I was a surfer kid, and I had Pendleton shirts and Converse tennis shoes and, 501 jeans. And hell, I thought I was it until we moved to the Inland Empire, which was not a lot about surfing, but a lot about FFA. And I went from the, California surfing scene to the Future Farmers of America. And I was bummed out. I just thought, what am I doing here? How did this happen to me? So my grandmother lived down the street. We lived alongside an orange grove. And I was really bored that summer. So I went to talk to my grandma, who was also a singer. My grandpa was they were in vaudeville. They were pretty old by that time. But she says, well, there's a little boy up the street who's a musician, and I know he's, looking for some friends. Maybe you should just introduce yourself, and maybe the two of you could have some fun together. So I did. His name was David Archuleta. He was a sax player. So we became fast friends, and the next thing you know, I was saying, hey, why don't we find some other musicians? And so I started looking around and put together a little band, and we were playing, the songs that I was learning and living at the beach, Dick Dale and the Deltones and the Ventures and, the Torquays and the Champs and stuff like that. And so we wanted to earn some money that summer. And so I asked my mom to contact the local Grand Terrace Country Club to see if we could play there. And of course, they turned us down. Whether they want a bunch of 13-year-old kids, right? But then we got a call back, and they said, we were wondering if maybe your son and his friends would like to play down at the pool house on Friday and Saturday nights, to the kids that, let's put it this way. Most of the people that went to the Grand Terrace Country Club were pilots in the U.S. Air Force, because there was an Air Force base there. And, pilots are very much like sailors. They don't feel good on land unless they have a couple of martinis that, unstabilize the ground. So they'd be up there having dinner, drinking martinis, and their kids would be down by the pool, and we were entertaining them. And we, we were paid Shirley Temples, all the Cokes we can drink. And I just got a sense at that time that this is what I wanted to do. The kids really loved the music and, starting to become acquainted with instruments. And I didn't have a very expensive one, but I later found refuge in a used Stratocaster, which really was exciting to me. So the whole process from about 13 years of age, I played all through high school. When I got to, the first group was called the Boutonniers. Then we went to the Pendletons. Then we went to the Jesters. Excuse me. And somewhere around probably the 11th grade, I was asked to make a record for a company called Audio Fidelity. And they took me into Hollywood at a place called Audio Arts, and they recorded all the songs that I had been writing while I was in high school. And of course, in those days, myself, my mother, nobody knew anything about the record business, but they managed to steal all of my publishing and half of all my songwriters. And I probably did not have very much of a royalty rate. I mean, I don't know where those contracts went, but they couldn't have been much if they were stealing everything else, right? And then they took and overdubbed dragster sounds over the recordings and called it Jim Messina and the Dragsters. And I can only assume that must have been what was popular at that point in time, dragster racing. So that was, something they were trying to market and produce. They had a young kid for really nothing to make an album with. So, but for me, it was a thrill. I never made any money off of it, but it was certainly fun to be able to have an album with my picture on it and in the 11th grade. And somewhere around that time, I got noticed by a man named Glenn Edwards, who was a disc jockey working at KEZY radio at the Disneyland Hotel. And he had a small record label, and he wanted to know if I would produce for him. And I didn't know what that meant. And he said, well, I just want you to come into town. I've got a couple of groups, solo artists. I want you to listen to their music. And if you like it, I'd like you to take them into the studio. And if anything needs to be changed or you're not happy with anything, you just tell them what you want. And I got you an engineer. His name was Mike Duro. I still am in touch with Mike Duro from all those years. And that's where I began my producing career in the 11th grade while I was still in high school.
Well, you're a studio engineer, producer, songwriter, performer. Out of all of those, are there any one of them that you're most passionate about?
Well, they're all equally important, and I've had to give equal time to each. I mean, in the last couple of days, I've been crawling around on the floor, hooking up patch bays and rerouting circuits so that it's a lot easier for me to patch when I'm here in the studio. But it's all important to me and has been in my career. Every element of it has given me the opportunity to excel to the point to where I could move on to the other. Probably the first part of my career was obviously playing guitar and performing as an entertainer. I wouldn't say as an artist. At that time, I was an entertainer. And as time went on, and I became, a producer and then an engineer, and then started back into actually playing bass for the Buffalo Springfield. I wasn't even playing my guitar. And then being around people who were more songwriter-oriented, singer-songwriter oriented, it began to inspire me as to what I might be able to do given who I am and how I feel and how I think, which was another opportunity to learn how to expand my creativity as a songwriter and then eventually as a singer-songwriter. So it's all very important to me, really from the resistor up to the legalies. Nowadays, I have to pretty much, I do all my own contracts and read them. And then if there's something I don't understand, I send them to the attorney and let him review it and rewrite it or change it to have the proper legal impact. But I need to be very aware of the contracts that I sign and language that's unacceptable, and make sure the revisions are still in my best interests. So it's all important. The whole process. It's not whether I enjoy one better or not. They're all work. What's important is to get them done right, make sure it feels right, and do the very best of my ability to do the best that I can. And sometimes that's successful in the sense of economic success. Sometimes it's not, but that's the way the world turns, right?
Exactly. You have such a great history with Buffalo Springfield, Poco, Loggins and Messina. Are there any particular standout moments that you want to talk about that happened while you were with those groups?
Oh golly, there's it's like, where do you begin? I would say probably in the Buffalo Springfield, one of the standout moments for me, it was a series of things. I was working as a recording engineer at Sunset Sound Recorders, and Gypsy, who was the manager there of the studio, came to me in the afternoon, and she said, "Listen, can you do a session tomorrow morning around 10 a.m.?" And I said, "Well, depends on how late I get out of here, but I guess I can." And she says, "Well, I've got you booked on a session. Maybe you can make sure you get done fairly early, or let them know that you need to." Because sometimes I'd work till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning with an act. Mm-hmm. Most of them like to work late. So at any rate, I managed to work that out. But before I left her, I said, "What do you want me to do?" And she said, "Well, I just want you to do a demo session in the morning. It's just voice and guitar." And I said, "Who's it with?" And she says, "David Crosby." And I went, "David Crosby? Is that Bing Crosby said it?" She goes, "I don't think so. And if I were you, I would not ask." I said, "Okay." So I show up the next morning, and he's there. And he said, "I need you to set up a microphone for vocal and a guitar mark for acoustic guitar. And then I want the lights dimmed in here, and I want you to plug in this lamp." And I thought, "Well, what is that?" He says, it's a lamp. What do they call it? They had the lava lamp.
Lava lamp, yeah.
I'd never seen one before. And I said, "What is it?" And he says, "It's a lava lamp. Just plug it in." I plugged it in.
They didn't have any of those up in the Topanga Canyon when you guys were up there, man?
Well, they did, but I was too busy working to sit home and look at one. So anyway, I plugged it in, turned the lights out. The artist shows up. So woman. And, I set everything up, pressed the record. We turned the lights down in the control room, and she began to sing one song after the other. And I remember hearing the music, and I thought to myself, wow, this lady can sing pretty good. And she played a lot of open tunings and stuff. And I thought, wow, she's really a good guitar player. I'm thinking all this to myself. And as I'm listening, I'm realizing that the images coming out of the speakers, of the songs and the lyrics that she was singing was really compelling, really different than most of the stuff that, I was working on. So when we got done with the session, I asked him, I said, "Who's the producer on this?" And he said, "Me, David Crosby." And I'm writing out David Crosby. And I said, "I wonder if I should ask him if he's Bing's son." I said, "No, I better not." That's not good. And so then I said, "Well, who's the singer?" And he says, "Joni Mitchell." So I wrote Joni Mitchell down, and I thought,
cool,
because I never heard of her before. This was her first time here to actually start recording, and it was a real treat to hear an artist not know who they are, hear their music, and be moved by it, and then for her to go on and be successful from that album of demos that we cut was really thrilling to see over the years, because obviously as I moved on in life, so did she. But that was wonderful. And then from there, I think it was David that told the band, Buffalo Springfield, that he worked with a young engineer, and that perhaps the next time they're in there to book me on their dates, which in a roundabout way that eventually happened. And I was on their sessions starting from the new Buffalo Springfield Again album. And when I first met the band, it was Neil that I met first. And I assumed he was the producer because he was the only one there and had all the tapes. And we began listening and assembling, what that album would be. And it was then that I discovered that Bluebird, which had been released as a single already, was that band, because I remember coming home at nights, listening to the radio 2 or 3 in the morning, and I remember hearing that song, and I didn't know what the band was. I never heard of the Buffalo Springfield. But suddenly I went, oh, wow, that's that band that I really liked the music from. And to be sitting with a group that I liked their music was wonderful, because you don't always get that as an engineer. Sometimes I had mariachi bands, they couldn't even speak English, and I'd ask them to count off, and they go C, and they go, boom, and they'd start playing, and I, geez, how am I going to cut this thing? So it was a thrill to be with the group. And then I met Stephen. Neil was very methodical and seemed to, have a sense in those days of what he wanted. He wasn't quite literate yet in recording techniques, but wanted to learn and always asking questions about how to do this, how to do that. Stephen, on the other hand, was more impetuous. He'd walk in and let's start right now. Where do I go? And I go, wait a minute, we got to set up mics and do all that stuff. But he was always in a groove. I mean, a lot of people thought he was kind of stuck up and self-centered, but I do believe the truth was that he just had music flowing through him all the time, and was just always in that mode of creating and writing and feeling music. Richie was different. Richie was, he was a singer-songwriter, wasn't as educated in the aspects of recording or writing music charts and things like that. A really good singer, and I thought at that time a really good songwriter. And of course, he was a big part of the support system in that band, because he lended his voice to the harmonies and stuff that they did. So as a team, I think the three of them really not only sounded great together, but when they did take the time to work together, the music was great. Then I got a call from Ahmet Ertegun one night. We'd finished doing the Springfield album, Springfield Again album. Mm-hmm. I got a call one night from Ahmet Ertegun. It's 10 o'clock at night in California. Had to be at least 1 a.m. from him, because he was in New York. Mm-hmm. Asking me if I'd consider producing the Buffalo Springfield. And I said, why are you choosing me? And he says, well, the guys seem to really like working with you, and you've done a great job on the record, and I understand you've produced records, and would you consider it? And I said, sure, I would. And so I got the job of producing them. And so when we started their third album, which would be eventually named Last Time Around, at the time I didn't know that, because the group seemed to be doing well in my humble opinion. That's from an outsider's point of view. And so we started making that third album, and then all of a sudden, Bruce Palmer, the bass player, got himself busted. And as the story goes, or as it was told me, he was a spiritual guy. He liked indulging in all kinds of spirits, and one of which he liked smoke. Yeah. And apparently what he was smoking was not legal. So he called the police to complain about the neighbors making noise, and the police show up, and they're at the front door, and they said, "Are you Bruce Palmer?" "Yes." "You said there was a noise disturbance happening?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "And you hear that?" And they said, "No, we don't really hear anything." And he said, "Well, come on in, let me." So he brings them in. He says, "You hear it now?" And they said, "No, we don't hear anything." So he goes over to the wall and puts his hand against the wall. And he says, "Do you hear that?" And so the guy goes over there and he says, and he looks down at the table and he looks at Bruce and he goes, "Yeah, I can hear that." Let's go down to the stage and talk about it.
That was the big Buffalo Springfield bust in Topanga, right?
No, that was later.
Oh, that was later. Okay. Different story.
This is hard. He busted himself, and they sent him back to Canada. So then there was an audition for bass players, and I had learned to play the bass by being around Joe Osborne, Mike Durow, who I mentioned to you was my engineer when I was still in the 11th grade in high school, became my mentor. And really, after the production deal ended because the label closed, I started thinking I could be a studio musician, but I just wasn't up to where the guys were at those times. I mean, they were, Glenn Campbell was playing guitar, Barney Kessel, James Burton, many
Tommy Tedesco.
Yeah. They were just avid readers. They could sit down and just read flypaper, and I wasn't to that. So I decided rather than go back to San Bernardino, I would just ask Mike Durow if I could work as an apprentice and work with him as a recording engineer. So he let me do that. That was at Bob Hudson's studio. Bob Hudson was a number one DJ at KRLA for many, many years, around 1965, 64. And so I apprenticed under him and started really learning how to become an engineer. And through that process, I was able to actually meet a lot of people. And one of the people that I met is that Mike and I built this recording studio for these two guys out of Shreveport, Louisiana, named Sonny Jones and Al Jones. And their sister, can't remember her name, but was married to Hank Williams and Johnny Horton.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got the studio finished, they said they were going to bring some of their friends over to kind of make some demos to check it out. Well, their friends happened to be James Burton, Joe Osborne, Roger Miller, Dorsey Burnett, just all these great rockabilly players that I remember seeing as a kid. I'm now, turning knobs for these guys, and I'm thinking, man, it doesn't get any better than this. And so Joe Osborne wanted to build a studio. I'm getting to this in a roundabout way, but Joe Osborne wanted to build a studio. Now I'd met him obviously in the studios, and he couldn't afford to pay me, just one of us, which would be Mike, because he was really the technical engineer. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll agree to help him as an assistant. When you're home and you have some time, I would really appreciate to learn a little bit more about bass playing. I'd like to start playing bass on my own records. And so he said, yeah, I'll do that. And so I'd spend time with him, and he talked to me about his amps and guitars and his style of picking, and how important it was to learn to read charts and read a little bit of rhythm. He says you don't have to read a lot, but once you recognize a pattern, you'll see that pattern, you'll know what it is. It's kind of like seeing the word stop and knowing that means stop. And I said, I get it. So Buffalo Springfield had lost their bass player, so they held an audition. And I had asked Neil, I said, look, can I audition for that? He said, yeah, sure, why not? So I went down to the old Moulin Rouge, which is where they were holding the auditions, and there was 12 people before me, and they had auditioned everybody. And Neil says, is there anybody else out there we've missed? And I raised my hand and I said, yeah, me. Oh, Jimmy. Yeah. Okay, come on. So I came up, I was the last one, and I plugged in. They started playing, and Stephen looked at me like, wow, you know this material? And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I've only spent 2 years here. This hit me in the head. But they had no idea that I was a musician. This is nothing I ever talked about. In fact, they didn't know I was a guitar player. They just, at that moment, thought, wow, he's a great bass player. And so I got the job. So now I'm working as their engineer, producer, and now their bass player. And it was a wonderful experience because, for me, engineering was not simple, but it was something I knew well. And production is something I had started when I was, still 15 years old in high school. And playing bass was exciting because I got to learn from one of the greatest bass players I thought of all time, is Joe Osborne. So everything is working for me, and I've been very much enjoying the process. And that kind of brought us up to the point where the next exciting thing that happened, or I shouldn't say exciting, but frightening thing that happened, was that we went on a tour with the Beach Boys, which lends me to the question you had about being at Liberty Hall. But 3 days before that, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and our tours were starting in the South. And it was extremely troubling time, not only with the loss of Dr. King, but just the uneasiness that was happening in the South at that time. So a lot of dates were canceled. We had a lot of experiences where, in those days, if you had long hair in the South, you were low man on the totem pole. And at that time, I remember, in order to get on the Beach Boys tour, we had to all have a mantra. Had to go through that whole thing that Mike Love was putting everybody through, and meditation and all that. And so we were meditating one time in the South at an airport. They had about a couple hours, and we went inside, Richie and I, to meditate. And we're sitting there with our eyes closed, and all of a sudden the lights come on. The cops come in, and they said, "What are you boys doing here?" And we said, "Well, we're meditating." He said, "Well, you could meditate your asses right out of here." we were thrown out. Anyway, yeah, it's all good.
I've got to ask you a couple of things here, because you mentioned Cross earlier, and first of all, Steve Postel, have you done any work with him? You know Steve?
I do know Steve, yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I've done a couple of shows with him and Leland Sklar and those guys, immediate family. They're great. Another one, when you mentioned Martin Luther King, it brought to mind Stack Studios, a good friend of mine that lives here in El Paso, Terry Manning. I don't know if you know Terry, but they just did that show on Max TV this week, the documentary on Stax, the studio, Stax Records. And Terry has one of the very last photographs of Martin Luther King. In fact, Terry was the one that took him to the hotel and everything, right? It's an interesting story. He talks about it in that documentary. You might want to check it out.
Let me write that down. What's it called? The Stax documentary?
Yeah, it's called Stax Records. Trying to remember, Soul. I think it's Soul something USA. Anyway, you can go on Max right now. It's streaming right now. There's 4 episodes, and it's really good, man. It goes through Steve Cropper. Steve's the one that hired Terry when he left El Paso. He went out to Memphis, and he talks all about the studio.
What's Terry play?
Terry plays guitar and sings and writes. He's got a studio here. He used to own Compass Records in the Bahamas. And he's produced Led Zeppelin, ZZ Top, George Thorogood, a bunch of them, man. I've done some work with him in the Sonic Ranch studios here in El Paso. Anyway, we've and there was another one I wanted to mention. You were talking about dragsters earlier out in L.A. when you were starting out, but it brought something to mind. KRLA, when the Bobby Fuller 4 were doing their recordings, they did one right there on their album cover with a dragster from KRLA. Do you remember anything about that? That would have been around 65, around that same time.
To be honest with you, you just Bob, what was his name? The producer,
Bob Keane.
Yeah, I worked for Bob Keane as an engineer right after Bobby Fuller had been, I guess, killed.
Yes.
And I was right there in the midst of all of that when Stevens had his first 24 track or 16 track. I can't remember what it was. And Barry White was working for Bob King as a new talent. And Barry and I used to work together doing he was crazy. It was interesting because he was like he's so big and powerful. And I remember when we were recording, he'd be beating on those drums. And I thought, my God, he's going to break a head. It's just going to, and he used to talk to me like that. Hey, Jimmy, go ahead and get it. Anyway, we became very good friends working together. And just as a sideline, I remember I was at the Grammy Awards and I'm walking up the hall and I hear this voice say, hey, Jimmy. And I look over there and he's sitting in the very back and it's hard to see him. And he goes, Barry White. And I went, Barry. And he goes, how you doing, buddy? And it was so great because he remembered me after all those years. And, you know, why he would, I don't know. But it was very sweet for him to, and by this time he's extremely successful. And anyway, Bob Keane, yes, Bobby Fuller 4. I fought the law and the law won.
Yeah. Right after he died, Jim Reese and Dalton Powell. Dalton's one of my best friends, the drummer. Jim Reese played in my band for 3 years. When he came back to El Paso, he joined up with us, and we were, God, it was a great group. We worked 6 nights a week the whole time I was going to college here at UTEP, and from 69 to 72.
So Bobby was from El Paso?
Yes. He wasn't born here, but he lived a good part of his life. And when they left to go out to LA, of course he got killed in 66, but he had already been out there briefly. They had been playing, trying to remember some of the places they played out there. I don't think they played the Troubadour, but I'm thinking of
probably played the Red Velvet, maybe.
The Red Velvet. Don't think the Baked Potato. I'm trying to think of, seems like it starts with a P. I'm trying to remember the name of it.
Well, there was the Red Velvet, and then there was where Johnny Rivers used to play.
The Whiskey A Go-Go?
Well, yeah, there was the Whiskey A Go-Go, but he also used to play at another place called, I think it did start with a P. It was...
We're thinking of the same place, I know.
Yeah, there was only like 3 or 4 places in those days that people used to play at. Troubadour was more folk music.
Yeah.
Whiskey was rock, and but there was another one called I'll think of it in a second. My brain has to.
We'll see who thinks of it first.
Yeah. But I grew up in Harlingen, Texas, down near Brownsville.
Right.
As a kid.
I got to ask you also, Howard Steele, Studio 55. Did you ever do any work with him and Richard Perry over there?
No.
Yeah.
No, I knew Richard Perry was represented by the same attorney as I was, so we'd see each other on holidays and things like that.
Sure. Well, moving right, we could talk forever. I wanted to ask you about the story. I heard the story and I love it, about the Rusty Young story, New York. You want to talk about that a little bit? That's really a cool one. Forming Poco.
I'm not sure what story it is.
About the steel guitar.
Oh, when I first met him, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Rusty. It was interesting because I had taken the Buffalo Springfield. Let's start over. Take 2. Could not get the studio and the band together at the same time. The band for some reason, they didn't like working together, didn't want to work together, or couldn't. They weren't organized, which is probably why Ahmed asked me to produce them. So I told Ahmed, I called him and I said, listen, I'm having a hard time getting these guys to show up there. They all got certain things they're doing here in town. And he said, well, maybe we should bring them to New York. I said, yeah, why not? And I'd never been there before, but Anyway, he gets his tickets, so we booked the flight, and I show up at the airport, and Dewey's there, Richie's there, Steven's there, but I'm not seeing Neil anywhere. But I figure maybe he's running late. We get to New York, and I see Steven. He's got his cowboy hat on. He's up front, and Dewey's got his fringe jacket. He's there, and Richie and I are standing next to one another. And I wait for Neil to get off, but no Neil. So we ended up checking in the hotel. Next morning, I've got a session booked, and nobody shows up except for Richie and I. So I told Ahmed, I said, I really need to get started here, and I don't know what to do. He says, well, we'll get, I'll get you with Arif Mardin. And Arif said, I'll get you the best cats in New York. So I said, great. So we start that session that evening. Well, one of the greatest bass players of all time, Richard Davis, shows up, did such a great job, especially on Carefree Country Day. So one of the first songs we do is Kind Woman. And I'm explaining to them that, this is it's a country song, but it's more of a ballad. And I want it to feel not like modern country, but I want it to feel country-ish. Oh, okay, we can do that. Well, the keyboard player, who's probably a brilliant keyboardist, never been probably to Nashville ever in his life, decides that means playing like Floyd Kramer. So, but and we get this song done. We get everything done. We get back to California, and we're working on Richie's song, Kind Woman. And I said, Richie, there's something that's just not right about this. It's just too jazzy. It needs to be brought back into where we are. Now, of course, Neil had done some songs that had some jazz elements to it. So I wasn't feeling too bad about getting too far away from it, because he'd already been there on Broken Arrow and stuff. I said, but I think what we ought to do is we had James Burton come in and play dobro on Child's Claim to Fame. And I said, why don't we grab a local steel guitar player, and maybe that'll make it work better, give it more of a country flavor. He said, yeah, that's a good idea. So I thought about, Red Rhodes or Sneaky Pete or Buddy Emmons, and a friend of ours who was actually our roadie at that time. He said, I know this young guy who lives in Colorado who is really a good steel guitar player, and he might just be perfect for you guys. So I said, well, that's going to be expensive. We got to fly him out, and we got to get him a hotel. He's got to eat. He says, yeah, well, those steel guitar players, they make triple scale. Hell, you'll be paying $700-800 for one of those guys if you're lucky. And hell, we're $100. We can fly him out, and hotel rooms are $25 a night. And I said, well, you know what? Let's give it a try. So he says, the guy's name is Rusty, and we brought him out. We're sitting in the studio. He opens up his steel, and apparently they had thrown it off the plane because it was too heavy. They didn't want to lift it, and broke it. Of course, this was Rusty's big chance to, play on an album where guys are his own age, and it was just not serviceable. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, Stephen bought a steel guitar on the road, and at a hawk shop, and hell, I got it in the back here. He says, well, bring it out. So we brought it out. I think it was a Fender, and it had cables on it, whereas Rusty's had these beautiful stainless steel rods that lifted the strings up a third or down a fourth or into a minor or whatever. And this Fender did the same thing, but it did it in opposite ways. And Rusty never said a word, but he put it upside down and started tinkering with it and tightening the cables. And we brought it up there. Well, the country neck wouldn't work. There was something wrong with the pickup was gone. That's probably why we got it so cheap. But the jazz neck, which is tuned to a C9 chord, worked. Again, I don't know anything about it. He's not mentioning a damn thing. He's just putting it together. So we set him up. We plug him in. We run the song by. He's sitting in the studio. I get everything right and the sound's working, and we make a pass. And I said, "Okay, Rusty, let's do one for real now. I got the level set." So in the middle of that take, a number of weeks before this session happened, Richie and I were driving in a car. I think we were going to Saturday and Chapin, someplace in San Francisco, guitar shop. And I asked him, I says, "What do you want to do when you leave the Buffalo Springfield? Do you have plans?" He goes, "No, I don't have any plans." And I said, "Well, I wouldn't mind working with you. Maybe we could put a group together. I know, we've been doing folk rock, but I really think maybe, we should think about putting more country into the music, and especially with your songs like Kind Woman and Child's Claim to Fame." I said, "It would make more sense to do country rock as opposed to folk rock." So, well, I don't know, we'll just have to wait and see. So fast forward now, we're in the session, and here's Rusty, and he's in the middle of playing a guitar solo. And I'm going, my God, this guy is great. He sounds great. And I look over to Richie and I said, "Remember that conversation we had in the backseat of the car?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, maybe this is the guy we need to make that music happen." And he said, "Wow, yeah." And so we got it recorded, and subsequent to that album being released, group breaks up, and Richie and I call upon Rusty to come out and see about forming a band. So that's kind of how how Poco got started at the end of Buffalo Springfield.
Speaking of Richie, Jim, are you going to see him when you're up in Colorado on your next tour?
Hopefully. I called to see if he would like to sit in. I think we're playing in Inglewood, Colorado. And so he said, "Yeah, I'd like to." So I sent him a couple of tunes to brush up on You Better Think Twice and Kind Woman. I do the song the way he originally wrote it, with all the odd bars. I assume you're a musician, you'll understand the difference between a 4/4 measure, a 3/4 measure, and a 5/4 measure, and a 2/4 measure. And in those days, he didn't have any clue. I don't think he still does, of what that is. But he wrote this brilliant song with all these measures in it, like "I got a good reason for rest. Love," that's a 2/4 measure in the middle of 3/4, and then he goes, "Kind woman."
I love the harmony on that, man. I love the harmony.
It's just, to me, I just love the original arrangement, love the harmonies. Richie has straightened all the time out, and I've said, no, I can't do that. "Well, I can't do it." You know what? Here's the music. Here's the way you wrote it. Here's the way we do it. Take a listen to it. And believe me, it'll be a lot easier once you realize you're only resting a beat each time you sing a phrase. So hopefully he'll get it and work at it. But we're going to have him do Kind Woman with us. Probably I'll start off singing the first verse and let him sneak in and then sing the second verse as a surprise for the audience.
That'll be cool.
And then we'll do, You Better Think Twice together.
I got to tell you, Jim, I woke up at 6 this morning. Some of my best creative work happens when I'm sleeping, and I think of stuff that I want to do with my interviews and all. And then I'll grab my iPhone real quick and jot down notes and then put it to the plan. That happened to me this morning. And I've never done this before, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to do this with you. When I woke up, I was thinking just randomly I came up with 7 songs. These were 7 songs that 5 of which we did of yours when we were traveling on the road, traveling all over the country. And what I want to do with you is I'm going to mention these songs individually, but I want to get a response from you, 1 to 3 words, an interactive response to each one of these songs. Okay? There's no right, there's no wrong. I just want to hear what you're going to say, okay?
All right.
Okay, we're going to start out with For What It's Worth.
Inspirational.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Mr. Soul.
I'm thinking Rolling Stones.
Kind Woman.
Love at Its Best.
I got a good reason for loving you. It's an old-fashioned sign. I kinda get to feeling like you know when I fell in love the first time. Kind woman, won't you love me tonight? I see the look in your eyes. Kind woman, don't leave me lonely tonight. Please say it's alright.
Your Mama Don't Dance.
Dealing with My Parents.
Your mama don't dance and your daddy don't rock and roll. Your daddy don't rock and roll, your daddy don't rock and roll. Your mama don't dance and your daddy don't rock and roll. Your daddy don't rock and roll, your daddy don't rock and roll. When evening rolls around and it's time to go to town, where do you go? To rock and roll. The old folks say that you gotta end your day by 10. If you're out on a date and you bring it home late, it's a sin. It just ain't no excuse, and you know you're gonna lose and not win. I say it again, and it's all because your mama don't dance and your daddy don't rock and roll. Your mama don't dance and your daddy don't rock and roll. When evening rolls around and it's time to go to town, where do you go?
Angry Eyes.
I'm taking the 5th on that one.
could, cutting me down with those angry eyes. You wanna believe that I am not the same as you, but I can't conceive, oh Lord, what it is you're trying to do with those angry eyes. Well, I bet you wish you could, cutting me down with those angry eyes. What a shock you could be if you could shoot at me with those angry eyes.
Thinking of You.
Inspired by a young lady working at CBS.
And one of my most favorite, and we did it so many times and got standing ovations, Danny's song.
How do I say this? The reason why I hesitate is because it was one of the first songs that Kenny brought to me. And it's also one of the first songs that he and I performed together before we were ever even performing at a state hospital where we were raising money for children who were challenged, let's say. And it was my father-in-law, Barry Sullivan, whose son was at that hospital. And I remember that it was not a popular song yet. It was just a song, really. And the people that were there were very grateful that we came and played music. It's one of those songs that had meaning before it ever had meaning, to me anyway. And it was appreciated by people who hadn't bought it or heard it before. And it was for a good cause. It's hard to explain what that song is. I mean, I know what it is because Kenny wrote it. He or Dan Latimos or whoever's on there as a writer. But it's had such a compelling and emotional effect to people. It's hard to know how something like that happens and so many people feel the same thing, but it's one of those songs that kind of has a life of its own. A life of its own. There you go.
You know, I watched the reunion concert or part of the reunion concert that you did with Kenny. I think it was 2005, something like that. Mm-hmm. And that was the last song you all did. And to see the audience reaction, I mean, that sums it all up right there.
We couldn't leave you without doing the first song we ever sang together. And I think it's fitting that it be the last song we sing with you all tonight.
It's called Happy Birthday. No, I'm
People smile and tell me I'm lucky one, and we've just begun. Think I'm gonna have a son. He will be like she and me, as free as a dove, conceived in love. The sun is gonna shine above. Here we go. my girl who rolls the world in a paper cup. Come on, drink it up. Love her and she'll bring you love. If you find she helps your mind, brother, take her on board. Boy, don't you let it go. Try to earn what lovers own. Everybody, even though we ain't got money, I'm so in love with you. I need everything will bring a chain of love. In the morning when I rise, bring a tear of joy to my eyes and tell me everything. Yes, indeed.
Good night. God bless. Thank you. Drive safe.
Thank you all.
And don't pull any wheelies going out of the parking lot either.
You
Yeah.
had everybody in that audience singing on that chorus. It was, I mean, it just gives me chills thinking about it. It was so great.
Yeah, I do that song in my show, and I get the audience singing on it, and it's sweet to look out there and see their faces and the joy it gives them. It's one of those songs where that and Your Mama Don't Dance and Be Free, Angry Eyes, they all have compelling effects emotionally, all different on an audience. So I think I started a class many years ago called the Songwriters Performance Workshop, and one of the elements that I facilitate is not how to write a hit song, but to guide them into learning how to make contact to the core of the listener, the emotional core of that listener. And my process of explaining the paradigm of how that happens and how to get that to happen. It's really what I work for when I'm writing a song and an arrangement, because they're all part of the same thing. I explained it to some of my students was that I'd get people who would write these lyrics and then write these melodies, and then the rhythms that go to them, it felt like you were standing on two plates of the earth, and one moving in one direction and the other. And how sometimes their lyrics would say one thing, but the tempo would say something else. And how important it is to understand the affect and the connection and the symbiotic relationship between rhythm and melody and lyric, and how they, it's kind of like, I remember many years ago, Steven Spielberg, when he was first starting, we're about the same age, he was doing a movie called Clear and Present Danger that Barry Sullivan was starring in. And he, even after they finished the movie, Steven would come up and visit Barry because he really liked him a lot. And I remember having one conversation with him in which I asked him, what role does really music play in your making movies? And at that time, he was very young. Both of us were. And he said something that really stuck to me, and that is that he said, music really needs to highlight while it underscores what's going on in the scene. And in order to give life and energy to what it is that you're watching. And after a while of listening to him talk, I suddenly realized, that music, songs are not much different than a movie. The difference is I'm not projecting with light onto a screen what I'm doing. So I have to figure out a way to do that where with rhythm and melody and lyrics that actually create that synergistically create that screen in your mind, which is what my workshop was about. It's explaining to them that, we have this core in all of us where we store everything that we've ever experienced in our life from birth to the present. And that as a songwriter, there are moments where those emotions want to launch out. And I explain my paradigm is very much like the planet Saturn, where you have the planet, then you have these rings that are around it. And the first ring is the feeling state. You have your emotional body, your feeling state. And once that emotion launches, it goes to the first state where you begin to have feelings about an emotion. And it's not necessarily anything but energy. And sometimes when I or you get a feeling about something, it can make you feel excited, it can make you feel angry, it can make you feel happy, it can make you feel joy, but doesn't necessarily have anything attached to it until you get into the next ring, which is the imaginary state where you either have pictures, you see pictures about that feeling, or you have thoughts about that feeling. And the last state is the verbal state, in which you either put words, music to those images or thoughts, which have feelings that are emotionally based. And if you can actualize that experience, put your emotions into feelings, give them images or thoughts, and then verbally convey them, your listener has the same emotional body. The first thing they do is they hear it. Once they hear it, they'll have either an image about what it creates, or they'll have a thought. And that thought or image will create a feeling. And if the feeling has any substance to it, it will then resonate an emotional part in your core. And that's what I call going core to core. When you can write a song, project it out, and have somebody hear it and experience it, that's what I call a predictable response. And the only way you can have that is to have performed the song and had somebody in your class or everybody in the class experience the same thing. Once that happens, then you can know you can go from set to set, song to song, and people will have the same reaction. Basically what you just talked about with Danny's song, where it doesn't matter what audience you play it in, 99% of the time you perform it, it's going to have a predictable response. Nobody's going to stand up and say, man, that's a piece of shit, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It just doesn't happen. So as a creative person, as a producer, as a songwriter, those are the elements in which I teach in my workshop that I work on myself. Doesn't mean I can do it every time, but I know what it smells like when it's good.
There's a friend of mine, and you may know him, Stephen McClintock, who has done a lot of these songwriter workshops. He's a producer as well, has written a lot of great songs. He's done a lot of movie soundtracks, and he got his first gold record writing for Tiffany, if you remember Tiffany.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and I think he lives in Long Beach. We stay in touch quite a bit, and he's brought a lot of connections to me for interviews and stuff, with people that he's worked with. Michael Peterson out of Las Vegas, and there's a bunch of them out there that are just really incredible writers. But why I'm telling you about him is that the first time I did a show with him, we talked about his writing for one of the songs that he did that Andy Williams did. It was a Christmas song, and really a beautiful song. And he did it in Branson at his theater there. Andy Williams did. And anyway, and he played that song, but he did one about singing about his son. And I had that same reaction that we were talking about with Danny's song when I heard that, because basically the father's singing about his son and how his son sees him as the father. And I mean, boy, it just ripped me, man. It just gets me every time I hear it. Beautifully well done. And And it's that kind of song that you're talking about, I'm sure.
What's the song called?
I can't even think of the name of it, but I'll text it to you when I talk to Stephen. I'll get the proper title, and I'll see if I can get a copy of it, a video of it or something, and I'll send it to you. But you'll like it. It's really well done.
Okay.
There is so much I want to talk to you about, and we're already into an hour. I want to talk about your Nashville band. Talk about your new group that you've put together there. The guys, I love the musicality of this group. I love the harmonies. I love what you've done with these guys. Talk a little bit about how you came about this new group.
Well, I had moved to Franklin in 2018, and I've been working with musicians that I adored and love. Michael Brady, who was bass player on my second album, I think the Messina album, and we'd performed and known each other for years. Craig Thomas, who played saxophone all the way from the Oasis, was still working with me. I had David Byer on drums, great drummer. Gary Olear on violin, and we'd been working together quite a long time. And I moved to Franklin, and for the first couple of years, I tried to tour with that band. And the problem was that, first of all, I was getting to the point where I was starting to perform places more than once or twice, pretty much playing the same music each time. And I wanted to move into my solo works. And one of the problems I had with that was I needed a keyboard player. And I really couldn't afford to have 5 guys plus myself, 6 people on the road at that time. And it was too expensive for me to fly people from New York. 2 guys lived in New York, on the East Coast. 2 guys lived on the West Coast. And to be able to have rehearsals meant hotels, flights, all of which was becoming very, very expensive. And so my agent said, look, there's a lot of musicians here in Nashville. They're not all country players. And he said, you should really consider perhaps augmenting what you have. Plus, he says, from Nashville, you can drive within 2 days almost of any place up to the Rocky Mountains. And there's a lot more engagements here for you. So I got to thinking, and I thought, well, I do need to make a change and get some new solo works in. Like, I wanted to bring in Loving You Every Minute. I wanted to bring in New and Different Way. I had a song that had been recorded by Brooks and Dunn named, it was Mexican Minutes. I had a number of songs that I needed to progress with. So I decided to start looking around and see what I could find. And I managed to find some really, really great players. I won't go into the extent to which that happened, but it was over a good year and a half. But my players now are drums. I got Jack Bruno, who's just a great drummer. Played with Tina Turner, Joe Cocker. He was with Delbert McClinton for a number of years before Delbert retired. Just a solid, great player, I managed to pull in Stevie Nieves, who was with me and Kenny on 2005, that album video that you saw.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the sax players and percussionist and vocalist.
He's great.
And I pulled in James Frazier, who's really a guitarist, but everyone kind of thought he was also a really great keyboard player. And I brought him in. He wasn't too confident he could play the parts. And I said, I think you can. You just need to listen to them and spend a little time. And
mm-hmm.
He did. And my God, when I heard this album that we're working on right now, which is a live album, he was able to capture the feeling of what I did on Oasis, as well as that was, with Jim Studer playing, who's a jazz player. He managed to pull out what Victor Feldman played on keyboards on Loving You Every Minute. I was just so impressed with his talent. He underplays his abilities, as does the bass player I have right now, Ben King. Ben King's about 33. He's a year older than my son, and he's really an old soul. He plays all country, modern jazz, funk. He's a high singer. fits the bills that I need for the Larry Simses of the world, or the Tim Schmidts that had sung some of those parts before. So the band consists of bass, drums, keyboards, percussionist who doubles on sax. Actually, he's a saxophone, doubles on keyboards and vocals. So we have 4 vocalists in the band. Really, really great players. They have bellied up to the bar on everything when it comes to the parts. And we're getting standing ovations almost on 4 or 5 of the songs every night. We're selling out shows, sometimes 2 nights in a row. And we're just now, starting to get, I want to do a live album with them first, because I find that most audiences, when we go to play, they go, wow, I really love that music. Which album can I buy that has those guys on it, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I wanted to get this album out first, this live album. And then I'm working on doing a studio album with the guys. And I want to, one of the things I learned about, producing and being in Poco was that the worst thing you can ever do is to get pigeonholed. And so many artists in the past have been pigeonholed for, they either do jazz or they do rock or they do country or they do this, and then they're never allowed out of that spot. And one of the reasons why I chose to work with Kenny was because he had a versatile sounding voice. He loved singing like other singers. That was how he used to make a living, by writing songs for a publishing company. If they needed a Leon Russell tune, he could sing like Leon Russell or Elton John, or you name it, he could do it, and was excited over the fact that he could do that. And my thought was, if I can put out an album that has a diverse amount of material on it, he might have a better chance at having a hit than we did in Poco, which is why the First Sittin' In album is so diverse, from country to rock to folk to maybe even some light jazz on that. I can't remember exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But fast forward to where I'm at now, that's one of the reasons why I think I'm able to maintain the continuity of my career, is that I'm very, very diverse in what I do, but it requires very, very diverse musicians. And these guys really fit the bill. And so when I go in to do the studio album, which probably won't do a full album. I think in this day and age, it doesn't make sense to that. You grab 2 or 3 tunes and create something and put it out there and see how it works. It's a different business than it was back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But they're just great people to work with. We're all in sync. We don't smoke or do drugs or chase women. We all have wives and families, and we're all of the age to where we really appreciate where we've gotten to. And most important, we love to play. And it shows in all of their performances. They're just so good. I feel like when I used to have a tennis court, I'm not a very good tennis player, but I always had people over that were better than me so that I could learn and get better at what I did. And I have to say, I think all of these guys are better than I am. So they keep me on my toes.
When we, with my last group out in LA, that rings really true to what I've said a bunch of times. I'm a singing drummer, but I always liked playing with guys that were better than me, because you're always going to be at the top of your game and want to learn, from these guys. And when we were out there, we were going to Dick Grove's workshop, studying with Tommy Tedesco and Lee Ritenour. And I was working with guys like Louis Belson and Ed Shaughnessy and Richie Lepore and all these great drummers, man. It was just wonderful, being out there and at the time and being around all this. So you just eat it up, but there's so much more I wanted to cover with you today, but I've got some editing to do and I want to make this thing really good. I want to put some more stuff in here, music wise. But
what we can do is, why don't we do a second take at some point in time, and then get this one to where you want it, and we'll pick up and do this again, maybe around some shows that we have. I know I'm going to be heading to Texas pretty soon. I talked to my agent about that. I don't know exactly when, But whatever you want to do.
Let me know if when you come to Texas, if you're going to go to Austin area, whatever. Both of our kids live in Austin, and our son's at the Moody Theater all the time. He's a photographer for Getty Images, so he's always shooting shows. In fact, he's getting ready to go to Nashville. He works. He's going to be there, I think, on the 4th or 5th for like 3 or 4 days during his birthday. He's going to be at Blake Shelton's Old Red, your club there. Yeah.
Oh.
This will be his 3rd year to come in and do an assignment there at Old Red with Blake Shelton. So he's going to be doing his thing there. But when you get to Texas, Jim, let me know, particularly like if you're around El Paso at all. Of course, we're out here in the west end of where nobody wants us, but I would love to see your new group. If we can make the timing work, if you're over around Austin, maybe we can go visit the kids and see you guys. It'd be really, really cool. But let's definitely do a part 2, because I would like to also cover more about your new album, the live and the studio album. Maybe we can put a little bit of some cuts in there and promote it for you.
That'd be great. The best thing to do is, don't leave it up to me, is Phyllis, your contact that you made with. She has our schedule and knows exactly when and where I'm going to be, more so than I do half the time. Okay.
No, she's been great. And I really appreciate, we had to work this morning thing out because I know that's when you like to do these, to make it work with your schedule. But I've got about another 30 or 45 minutes of stuff that I could have worked in here with you today, but I'm glad we got done what we did, because you're a great storyteller. I really appreciate it. And I just want to kind of close this thing by telling you that first of all, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to play your music coast to coast, to include Canada. I did that for 6 straight years on the road, and that was from 73 till 78. And I want to thank you for your talent, your passion for performing great music, Jim, and allowing me the opportunity to include you with my Talkin' Rock artist alumni. I really I've had some great interviews, but you're up there with some of the great ones, man. I really appreciate your time and working with me on this, man. You're one of the great ones.
Was very kind of you. I have a question. Behind your left shoulder there's a photograph just to the I guess to the right of the Bobby Fuller drum. And who is that wearing that white hat there?
That guy up there, his name is Angelo Amoriello. I used to manage their band. They were called Route 66. And that was at a show that I used to produce called The Border Legends of El Paso. And that was where I would bring back the groups of the 60s and 70s. In fact, Randy Fuller of the Bobby Fuller Four, God bless his soul, we lost him about 5 days ago. He just passed away. And but
who was it?
Bobby Fuller's brother, Randy Fuller.
Oh wow,
that's actually he went by Randall Fuller, and but a lot of us called him Randy, but most of us called him Randall. But he was living out in Colton, California, and he just passed.
In Colton, why Colton?
I don't know why, but he lived out there for a long time,
That's where I went to high school.
Really? That's interesting. Yeah. He's been out there a long time, and it's but that's who that was. And I was playing drums behind Angelo and his band there, Route 66.
Angelo, what kind of music did you play?
Well, that was like Route 66. It was everything from Beatles to, you name it. Proud Mary, they did it all covers, no original stuff. It was just a cover band, and music of the 60s and 70s, everything, just you name it. It was all pretty much covered. They didn't do For What It's Worth or Mr. Soul, but
that wouldn't have fit. That wouldn't have fit at all.
But they're great guys. He's now living over in the Austin area. He left El Paso. Angelo did. He and his wife built a house over and they're living in a place called Kissing Tree, right? About 30 minutes from Austin and Dripping Springs. But
well, my sister lived in Dripping Springs, and my brother-in-law was the sheriff of Hays County, Texas, Paul Hastings, and but my family were all in Austin for quite a while, and he worked as a chief investigating officer for the DA's office in Austin before he became sheriff. So those are all stomping grounds for me.
Well, I love it.
And I had to be nice, and otherwise I'd be in a lot of trouble. It's hard to misbehave when your family's in law enforcement. You got to, walk a straight line.
Well, and Angelo there, he's a drummer, a singing drummer as well. But on this particular song, I'm playing drums and he's out front on it, so he could get out front and do his thing. It was pretty cool. And he's a New Jersey guy. He's from He's from Jersey City. Yeah.
You just let fellas know when you want to get back together, and we'll try to schedule it in for you.
I will, buddy. Thank you so much, Jim. I really enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your weekend, and get her done, man.
All righty, buddy. Take care.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.